Nick, we've had some collateral damage out of the federal conservative leadership race. Pierre Poilievre has gone after the Bank of Canada, and former Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge had some choice language in response to that. I just want to play you a clip of what he told Evan Solomon.
Pierre Poilievre says the bank is financially illiterate. It's been so bad.
Well, that's bullshit, to be blunt.
That's blunt. Really?
Yeah, absolutely. The bank understands.
You're insulted by that.
Yes, I'm very insulted by that.
And why? Why?
Why? Because they understand what's going on. They made a judgment call,
right,
which I think was 100% right.
Right.
And would have been claimed by people like Poilievre to be absolutely crazy in the spring of 21, in the spring of 20. But it was that judgment call in the spring of 20 that saved us from a real depression coming out of the pandemic.
Interesting.
Wow, that was blunt.
Hey, Michael, I'd like to know what he really thinks. Was he holding back? I don't know, because obviously David Dodge knew that he was on TV. You know what? He's a distinguished civil servant. Not only did he head up the Bank of Canada, he was a deputy minister in the Ministry of Finance. Yikes! You don't usually hear that too much. But this is the visceral reaction that at least some people are having to Pierre Poilievre's attacks on the Bank of Canada. But Michael, to your point, this puts into clarity what the Poilievre strategy is. He is the anti-establishment candidate. And I think that's his positioning. That's his positioning, and it's good positioning for him against Jean Charest, who, you know, as a former progressive conservative member of the Brian Mulroney cabinet, as the premier of Quebec, hard to say that he's not part of the establishment. And, you know, I would even put Patrick Brown as part of the establishment because, you know, he was leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario and now is a municipal leader. So it looks like what this puts into clarity, this whole idea of Pierre Poilievre as an outsider, as an anti-establishment candidate, someone who's trying to tap into voter sentiment, that percentage of voters, or the proportion of the electorate that think that the system is broken, that it needs to be smashed into little bits and remade. And I think that's why we're seeing Pierre Poilievre do a full frontal assault on the Bank of Canada. And you know what? Expect more, because this is his core positioning. Him as the anti-establishment outsider, there as an agent of change, and then the other candidates as the establishment.
So Nick, as you just said, he's tapping into, I guess, growing anger from a segment of the Canadian population, and you've been tracking, you know, the top issues of concerns among Canadians. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, we do know that, for example, during the course of the convoy, that the issue of freedom or freedom being under attack actually was on the rise as a national unprompted issue of concern. But underlying all of this is economic anxiety, people being worried about the future, not having hope, basically people doing their job, working hard, trying to save money, try to make ends meet, but they just can't get ahead. You know, the price of everything is going up, the price of rent is going up, the price of a mortgage, inflation's going up, and just a sense that the system is letting them down, that they're doing everything they're supposed to do, but that the system is letting them down. And, you know, for those individuals, if you can't pay the bills, what do you have to lose by opting for any politician or leader who says that there's a problem and we need to change things?
So on the other side of this debate, you have, I suppose, the establishment candidate, as you said, Jean Charest. How do you hit back on this? You know, when you're in a debate, what when you're representing the system, I suppose.
Well, I think the most natural response for any candidate, whether it's Charest or Patrick Brown, would basically to say, you have two choices. Do you want a party and country that's divided, or do you want a party and country that's united? And to use that as the counterpoint, that appealing to narrow audiences, dividing Canadians, firing them up on the big issues, does not create long, sustainable solutions and is not healthy for democracy or the country moving forward. So think of unifiers versus what I'll say, people that focus on specific audiences and try to motivate them to win.
Nik, you've literally written a book about this on voter anger and how it sort of could favor more populist candidates. So in the current situation that we're in, where so many Canadians are worried about a recession, about the economy, I mean, do you think Poilievre might have an edge in this leadership race?
Well, I think he does have an edge in this particular environment just because of where we're at. In a recent survey that we did, we asked how concerned or not concerned people were with a potential recession. 43% of Canadians were outright concerned, and another 4 out of every 10 were somewhat concerned. That basically means that almost 8 out of every 10 Canadians have some sort of concern about a potential recession, and this feeds the narrative that there's a problem, that people are worried, and that they want change. They want to hear solutions, and perhaps they want to hear solutions that are different from the past. And not to dismiss anything that's been done in the past, but if you haven't benefited from what's happened in the past or don't feel that you've benefited, then you're probably looking at alternatives. And that's why someone like Pierre Poilievre has traction. But the thing about what he's doing in this anti-establishment positioning is that we know in the United States, in France under Marine Le Pen, that it's a very good way to motivate voters. That for those people that do believe that the establishment has let people down, that are worried about the future, they're very motivated to vote with their feet and to get out and vote.
Nik, I want to switch gears now and go over to Ontario, where we have our provincial election is in full swing. Where do things stand so far? You've got the latest polling on that.
Well, we've been doing weekly tracking with CP24 and CTV News, and the latest tracking for this week shows that the Progressive Conservatives under Ford have an advantage. They're at around 35%. The Liberals are at 30%. New Democrats at around 24%. Greens 4%. The New Blue at around 3.6%. So right now, a marginal advantage. But we have to remember the margin of error for the survey is about 4.4 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So the Tories got a 5-point advantage. That's not a big advantage. And in the last election, think of it this way: they were at 41% in the last election. But the numbers that have really changed since the last election has to do with the orange and the red teams. Like the New Democrats, in the last election had 34%. Now they're down to 24%, while the Liberals were at 20, and now they're up to 30% support. So there's stuff going on in terms of people being more open to voting for the Liberal Party of Ontario, and the NDP not showing as well currently than they did in the last provincial election.
I know in previous episodes, Nik, we've talked about how Ontario NDP leader Andrew Horwath has just done better and better, as we get into the next election. But the Liberals now have a brand new leader in Stephen Del Duca. So how much of this rise in Liberal support might be attributed to his personal brand?
And hard to tell at this point. The fact that the Liberals are challenging is important, and usually the Liberals are the main challengers to the Progressive Conservatives. We ask Ontarians who they prefer as the premier. Ford's ahead at around 29 points, followed by Del Duca at 24. But the key movement in the first week of the campaign has been Del Duca. In the very beginning of the campaign, only 17% of Ontarians gave him a tip of the hat as the one they would prefer as premier, and that's up to 24. So he's up a full 7 percentage points, and he's starting to pull ahead of Horwath. He's numerically ahead, 24-20 on the preferred premier front. Still within the margin of error, but it looks like after the first week, not having made any mistakes, not having blown up, not having made any significant missteps, that a number of Ontarians are starting to kind of kick the political tires on the Del Duca campaign. And at least week one, he had a pickup in terms of his personal brand, but the ballot numbers didn't move. So the ballot numbers were the same. So brand up, ballot flat for the Liberals.
How much of the personal support numbers going up for Del Duca do you think is just because Canadians may not be, not to take anything away from him, but that Canadians aren't that familiar with him?
Yeah, well, you're starting at zero, not quite
Mm.
zero, but he's an unknown commodity. And that's why the debates that will take place throughout the course of the campaign, especially the one next week, which will be the big debate, will be critical because, Horvath and Ford are, for all intents and purposes, known commodities.
Hmm.
I would hazard to say that most Ontarians have opinions of both of those and feel that they're familiar with both Horvath and Ford. Del Duca is the new person on the political menu. And I think when folks look at the campaign and look at the debates when they do occur, that it'll be looking at Del Duca to see how he stacks up against Horvath and Ford. And we'll see whether he has either a breakout moment or a recoil. Yeah,
Right.
recoil can happen too, right? People can
Right.
go, yeah, I thought he was okay, and then not. Or he's better than I thought he was. And then the numbers might even move even more for the Del Duca brand personally.
And just a note for our listeners, we will have a special Ontario election episode released after next week's debate. So watch out for that. Nik, we already talked about some of the top issues of concern federally, but what are the top issues for Ontario?
Well, it's interesting. The top Ontario issue right now is healthcare at around 26%, followed by the cost of living at 18%. But the kicker on the cost of living stuff, and it probably has to do with, you go to the gas pump and gas is up, everything's up, that just in the past 7 days, concern about the cost of living is up 6 points from 12 to 18%. Housing still one of the top issues at around 10%, the environment 9%, economy at around 8%. So Michael, think of it as a 1-2 punch on the issue front. First of all, healthcare. Second, economic issues like the cost of living and housing and the economy and jobs. But what is not on the radar right now significantly is the pandemic. So if Doug Ford and the progressive conservatives think that this election could be a victory lap on their job managing through the pandemic, like it has been for other provincial governments during the course of the pandemic, it's not on the agenda. So what does this mean? People are interested in Ontario. What are you going to do for me now? Not what have you done in the past? And I think that's probably the key takeaway. And the focus on healthcare is our healthcare system strong and will be able to deal, and is it resilient enough to deal with future threats? And then, can I pay the bills? Will I be able to pay the rent?
Nik, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about Russian President Vladimir Putin and his own state polling. Nik, so the war in Ukraine has dragged on for months now. There have been heavy losses on both sides. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has been accused of war crimes. And yet his own state-run polling would appear to show that he is more popular than ever. What do you make of this?
Well, we got to be careful. And you know what? I've got a chart we can throw up. And this has been collected by Statistica on polling that not that it did, but that it's reporting on that has been done in Russia. And why don't we say we shouldn't take this with a grain of salt. We should take this with a big boulder of salt, because check out the trend line, like 80% approval rating. Like,
honestly,
I don't know what to say.
When I see state-run polling, that definitely raises the flag.
And you know what? It speaks to the importance of in a democracy having independent polling that's done scientifically in a democracy, because think of it this way: in the news organizations that are state controlled and state managed in Russia, they're reporting on these polling numbers. So people are like thinking, okay, so Vladimir Putin's approval ratings 80%, and there are probably some Russians that think, I thought there were more people that thought like me and perhaps weren't 100%. So we have to be careful with this. But it speaks to, I think it would be fair to say that just because we're talking about Russia as a country where the government does have a significant influence on the news, that there is probably support for Vladimir Putin and approval for what he does among certain segments of the Russian populace. I find it hard to believe that it's 80%, but there is some support. But that's probably in contrast. And for anyone in the West that's in an open and democratic society, they're probably thinking, I don't know how anybody could approve of what he's doing. But this speaks to the importance of having a free media, but also having an environment where researchers, survey researchers can do their job to capture opinion. So, yeah.
Nik, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a surprise visit to Ukraine. He was in Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky there. How is that playing in Russia, do you think? I mean, with all these Western leaders coming there in person now to support Ukraine?
Well, I think it validates the Russian assertion. So think of it this way. Most Russians believe that they are already at war with NATO. They see Ukraine as a proxy state that is being funded and armed by NATO allies to fight the Russians. So from a Russian perspective, they're already at war and with Ukraine and NATO, and that the visits of different NATO ally leaders, such as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, just makes that connection. Now, that said, this plays very well domestically in Canada because Canadians overwhelmingly support Ukraine and Ukrainians on a humanitarian basis. They want to, in any way possible, try to solve this problem and for Ukraine to be an independent, democratic, and free country that is peaceful, where people can go back. So, I would hazard to say that this does play well internationally, but it speaks to almost like the two solitudes where, I think the unspoken ugly truth is that we are in a proxy war with Russia, but many of our politicians kind of skirt around that. But you look at what all of the NATO allies are doing. The NATO allies are doing everything possible to support Ukraine, including trade sanctions against Russia, including financial aid for the Ukrainian government, including supplying arms whenever feasible. They're doing everything except putting boots on the ground there. So we're in 100%. And that's basically where we're at, because Canada supports Ukraine and wants to see Ukraine as an independent, free, and peaceful place.
Nik, I think we'll leave it there for this week. As always, thanks very much.
Take it easy.